This is the Math Map Book Club, where ordinary parents encourage one another to develop an extraordinary appreciation of math. We love what we know and struggle over the unfamiliar. Through weekly conversation and exploration among friends, we can begin to enjoy ideas that seem difficult. Join our book club as we discover how math helps us to know God and to make Him known.
Hi, I'm Lee Bortons, and it's Wednesday, January 31st, 2024. Welcome to the Math Map Book Club, where Kirsty Gilpen and I discuss 2 lessons each week from our soon-to-be-released math curriculum for families, the Math Map. It's for families with students in Classical Conversations communities. Kirsty, this is our second time going through the curriculum, and I'm just really enjoying it all over again. Thanks for the hard work.
I agree. It's amazing how much, just going through the naturals, how much we learn the second time around. And I think that's just such a testimony to the power of the classical method, right? That repetition teaches us something new every time. So we are this week talking about lesson 7 and lesson 8. And so I went ahead and highlighted the column and the rows here. So you can see we're working through the naturals. So that's that red column all the way down. So if you are working through the naturals, every lesson is going to be done using natural numbers and exercises that are appropriate for a 6-year-old. So lots of tracing and copying, really emphasizing the grammarian nature of what we're doing, right? Becoming familiar with the symbols and the words and the images of mathematics. Then this week, we are looking at 2 weeks or 2 lessons, 7 and 8, exponentiation and equations. And as we look across there, we would see that if we had multiple children at home, that we could all be talking about the same topic, but at the level that's appropriate for our child. Or even if I have children that are all the same age, such as in a challenge classroom, those students can all be talking about the same topic, but at the level where they're at. And I think that's one of the things that the Math Map is going to really bless our challenge classrooms with, because right now math is so linear. And anybody who's tutored in the challenge level knows that if you're tutoring through Saxon, Saxon has a lot to offer, but if you're tutoring through Saxon, if your students are off just by a few lessons, they could be doing widely different things at home and not be unified. And so the Math Map gives us that opportunity to have a unified conversation in community and yet still be able to meet the needs of our students with activities and exercises that are appropriate for them. So are there any lingering questions from last week that anybody would like to ask before we jump into lesson 7? Okay, so let's take a look at page 1 from lesson 7 and go ahead and take a minute to look at that page and tell us, what do you see that's familiar and what do you see that's unfamiliar?
The blocks look like Matthew C. manipulative.
Or Saxon. Or pretty much any elementary math uses them. Unit blocks. The lighter colored bars are familiar. It tells me there's different concepts going on across the page. The flashcards checkbox. The eye is familiar if I know what it is or not. It's been there multiple times.
Great job, Donna. Now, how about what's unfamiliar? Is there anything unfamiliar to anybody?
Well, I've seen the word log before, but there's a lot of, like I see there's a log with a little E symbol and log with different numbers. That's pretty unfamiliar to me.
Jana, you think you can figure out the pattern?
I think so. It looks like the square root and the log and the index or the exponent are all related, and that number, there's like I'm looking at the second half of this bottoms or the middle part of the bottom section. And the number 3, 2, and 9, they're all switching places. But I can kind of see yeah, I see the pattern there.
That's awesome, Jana. And I love that you highlighted two different things in what you just talked about. One, that when we say something is familiar and unfamiliar, there can be sort of degrees where I can say I'm familiar with that, but I don't really know what it means, or I'm familiar with part of it and I don't know the other part. And just what you did, Jana, was beautiful, and saying, I'm kind of familiar with these things, and I can take the parts that I am familiar with to start building and saying, what now, how can I look at that unfamiliar thing and figure out maybe what it is, right? And start using those tools of learning to put those things together. And so you've answered one of my questions, right? What three things belong together? And one of the things that I personally have, as we've worked on the math map, I personally love the fact that now I understand what logarithms are, because for a long time I remembered it from high school algebra 2, and I would have to sit there and really think through, what's a logarithm, where does this fit, where does it, right, what does it mean? And now I see that if I see this 3-part relationship, right, there's exponents, there's roots, and there's logs, that the 3 things go together. And for me personally, that taught me more about God, right? So I saw how knowing something about the Trinitarian nature of God taught me something about this relationship, and then how this relationship in reverse taught me something about God. And so one of my favorite things that I've learned over the course of the last 7 years. I was also going to point out, there's at the top left corner, what 2 types of scales are there? Just right, when we talk about reading, what are the 2 types of scales are there?
Linear and logarithmic.
Linear and logarithmic. And what do we do with linear scales? What's the operation that we're using?
Addition.
And what operation are we using for the logarithmic scales?
Multiplication.
Multiplication, right? So there's a case where our youngest students may just be coloring the blocks in and not really know anything. But especially for us as parents, or for our older students who may be using the naturals, right, even from the simplicity of this lesson, we can start making some connections. All right, let's look at page 2. And how about here? What's familiar and unfamiliar?
The names of the laws are familiar at the bottom.
Great. Where else have they seen those?
Foundations, memory work.
And using a ruler is generally familiar.
The use of a number line with the greater than or less than symbols.
Good. So is that's becoming more familiar, or is that something that's unfamiliar?
That's something that's familiar, because it shows you where things are bound on a number line.
Right.
Oh, you used the word bound. Very good.
And I know I was taught this in school, but I had forgotten, when you draw the circle that's like on the 1 and the 4, they're open, then you've put the expression above it. So they're seeing both of those things together over and over again. And when there's a greater than or equal to sign, then that little dot is closed in. So that gives us an even better picture of what those bounds are. Does it include this number, or does it not include this number?
That's great, Jana.
The 4 to the 0 and the 4 to the 1 is familiar from the page before,
Great.
because they had examples of numbers to 0 and the first and 0 powers.
They're also right there on the left.
Oh, I was thinking that initially what looked unfamiliar was, or what might look unfamiliar to a young student is the, I want to say yardstick. It's not really a yardstick, but the measurements going vertically instead of horizontally. We're used to seeing them horizontally. But what is familiar, and particularly with the scale, is like the growth charts that we used to measure them on. Like they look like that. They're vertical. So it's familiar and unfamiliar at the same time.
Yeah, in the same way, the law names are familiar, but using them with exponents is definitely unfamiliar.
Do our students have to understand those laws for these exercises, or could they complete these exercises without really knowing what they're doing?
You can complete them without knowing what you're doing.
The only problem is the last two are wrong, guys, so we'll correct those. The 3 to the 7 times 8 should equal 3 to the 8 times 7 because you're commuting. So it breaks the pattern of the other two. So that's an error we would correct. Do you see it?
On the 3 and the 4 in commutative, is that where you look?
Yep.
Yeah.
So.
So you guys are doing a great job of like starting to look into the details, right? And so a page like this one, especially where there's just so many numbers and symbols, it would be really easy to pull back and go, oh, there's just so much. But you guys are doing a great job of being like, wait a minute, oh, that's all I need to do, right? And I think that's one of the things that we've talked about over the years is if you just read the words, read the instructions, and look at what you have to do, it's usually a lot more straightforward than it feels when you first look at it. And so that's one of the things I want to encourage everybody, especially those of you who are going to be using the complex materials this fall. When you look at the pages, it may look like you're supposed to do more than you really are. And so it's so important to read those instructions to really identify what is it that you're doing here.
And something with a student who's very unfamiliar is if the first is the form of the number. And so this is why they're just writing in numbers. I don't know if you notice on page 1, we said to them, write 2. Like that was the only instruction, just write 2 everywhere. Here they get to actually do a little bit more. But even if they wrote the wrong numbers in, especially at this age group, I would just say, well done, you put them in the right place. Let's try to read this equation to each other. Because, you know, little kids, it's very abstract concept, actually, even though we were just switching 2 numbers around.
Can I ask a question? I forget what we do in class, and when we go to teach the complex in that one community day, what pages are we discussing in class again?
You'll be discussing pages 1 through 4, but only that top section.
Top section.
And so what you'll do in community is you as a tutor will, Lee talks about wrestling, right? Wrestling with ideas. And so I love that image. And so that initial thing is that wrestling together, right? As a class, we're going to look at the top and we're going to say, how do we approach this, right? So you as a tutor can help them to wrestle through what are you supposed to do. And you might go through pages 1 and 2, or 1, 2, and 3, or 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then you're going to assign the other page tops to your students to be working on in class, and then say, okay, look, I did it. So that's the goal in community, is just to look at those page tops and together 1 and 2, or 1 through 4.
Even with the older students, they should eventually get some comfort in knowing, okay, every time there's a vertical number line on the 1 set, it's either an I or a Y. On the 2 set, it's either a ruler. On the 3 set, it's a thermometer. And on the 4 set, it's a vector. Like the same type of problems keep coming back over and over.
Is there? Yeah.
ahead.
Is there a certain format to follow at home? I'm going to meet with some of my parents tomorrow to go through this because they're very interested in it. And I know that's going to be their question is, how do I know what to do at home? Our community day is Thursday. So what does their Friday look like? What is their Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday? I don't see that on here. I know it's flexible depending on the family, but do we provide, it's probably going to be in the guide. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, it will be in the guide. And so one of the great things, if this hasn't been made clear, is that you will go, let's say you were on week 7, you're going to present lesson 7 in community. And then they are going to go home and they are going to be working first on their flashcards, right? So we want to emphasize spending time with the flashcards and making sure that they're fluent in those facts, right? The computation facts, the notations, the fractions. So spend some time with those flashcards. Then each family is going to be a little bit different. So they may want to spend some time talking about the art, right? What did you see in community? What did you like? What do you see? That may be a part of that family conversation. As far as the lesson pages, the curriculum is designed to go from page 1 to page 16, 4 pages a day. And so Lee is always emphasizing for challenge students, not necessarily our younger students, but for challenge students, if they spend an hour a day on math, they're going to become familiar, right? That don't spend more than that, right? So if you're don't get finished in an hour, don't keep going, right? So it's not like, oh, you have to get this done, but it was designed to be approachable in an hour a day to do those 4 pages. And they can go pages 1 through 16, so 1 through 4 on day 1. And if they do that, then they're going to see all the major concepts from the week. And it is not always, this is not always true, but it is generally true. We tried to do it wherever we could, that page 1 reflects concepts from chart 1, and page 2 reflects concepts from chart 2, page 3 reflects concepts from chart 3, and page 4 reflects concepts from chart 4. So if they do pages 1 through 4, they're going to be introduced to concepts from each of those chart pages, major concepts.
And if you forget everything that Kirsty said, because what she just said is absolutely right, it is all written down for you in the week 1 booklet that every student has. It tells you how to go through the books.
So
where are those booklets?
Sorry?
Where I received the complex materials as a challenge A director, and I'm looking through the 7, and I'm just trying to understand how I'm going to show them this, because I see pages 1 through 7, and then I see the color change.
Yes.
And then I see C7:1.
So if you look in the center of your book, if you open your book flat so that you see the staples, those middle 4 pages, that sort of the middle 4 pages are the solutions. And so you should see small images of small pages with a reddish color with the solutions. Those are in the center so that you can pull those out and keep them separate. And a parent can decide whether or not they want to give those to the student to use as a resource or keep them for themselves, right? So again, there's flexibility there. If those are pulled out, the next 4 pages are those pages where you said there was a color change and they're blue. Those are the charts. And so those charts are the same every year. They are blue to remind you that that is the goal for our transcendental students. So that blue is the transcendental blue. And our goal is that over the course of many years, our transcendental students would become familiar with the materials on those charts. They're there as a reference each week for families and for students to use. Younger families or families with younger students can see where what they're working on fits into the big picture. Older students may use that as a reference. So those two you can pull out of the booklet and keep as a separate reference. And so we recommend somebody having a binder and each week adding your charts to it so that you end up with a reference of those charts. Then you'll be able to see that it goes from page 7 to page 8. And so there's 16 lesson pages that are in the middle of the book. The booklet Lee is referring to is booklet 1. So if you look for booklet 1, which is ex nihilo, what Lee did there to help parents and tutors and families is if you start on page 1 and you work through, the top blurb of each page is going to introduce you to a different piece of the curriculum. So it's going to step you through those booklets and help you to know how the curriculum is laid out. And so the best thing you can do if you're introducing this to your families is just use that ex nihilo booklet and read those captions right from the top and say, okay, everybody look at your cover. This is what it says the cover is. Now look at your solutions. This is what it says the solutions are, and so forth. Does that help? Oh, you muted yourself. Okay. Great. Well, I'm going to go ahead and look at page 3 with you. And I just want to point out on this page that we use 2 different words for a very similar idea. And that is index versus exponent. And so if you look on this page, there's a place in the middle that says write the index, and then a little bit lower and to the right, it says trace the exponents. And I wanted to point out that index is a noun, an exponent is a noun too, but bear with me for a minute. When we talk about the index, we're talking about a specific portion of that power relationship. So if we went back a couple, I'm going to go back a couple of slides to here. And when we look at that 3 squared equals 9, and then the square root of 9 equals 3, and then the logarithm base 3 of 9 equals 2, those numbers, notice, change their position, but they always have the same name. So the 3 is always my base, 2 is always my index, and 9 is always my power. And so when we look at these arrangements here, we're always talking about the same thing. When the index is written as a superscript, it is also an exponent, right? And that exponent is acting like a verb because it's telling us what to do. Just like the square root sign with the 2 is telling us what to do. So the root is our verb telling us what to do, our action, and then the logarithm is telling us our action. So that is not something that your students need to know, especially not in the naturals years. But for parents, I just wanted to point out to you that we are working on building that familiarity and using words specifically and precisely so that as they grow, these ideas really become familiar and they start to understand it. One of the things that I've learned from the math map, from the work we've done with the math map, and has become sort of a pet peeve, is that we all grew up hearing our math teachers say it, and then we started saying it. We'll say something like 3 to the power of 2. And so we all think that the exponent is the power because we're not using language precisely. But the power is really the 9, it's the whole thing, right? 3 squared is the power, 9 is the power. So we are trying to be better about using language precisely and saying the second power of 3. And so that we're very clear about that whole thing being the power. But I just wanted to take that minute to share that with you. Not something, right? These are the small words, not something we would expect our students to know, certainly at this age, but hopefully over the course of many years of the math map, they'll start to pick up on that.
Let me just interject too. That's where the charts are helpful then for the older student, because the chart actually shows the form where the word is written out, base, indice equals power. So the charts are there for additional clarity and in the big picture of where we're going.
And so page 4 of lesson 7, again, if you remember, we started with scales, linear and logarithmic scales, and we came back here and we're looking at scales again. These are both logarithmic scales, but now we're writing them both with numbers and with the powers. And so students are just slowly over time being introduced to these ideas. And this is, as you look at this in that bottom box there, place value, which we've been talking about every week, and that idea of repetition and review. So this is really the last lesson. Lesson 8 is still in 1D. It's a little bit of a different layout in some places, but what we've tried to do in 3 through 7, in those 1D lessons, we've been looking at an operation each week, and Lee has worked really hard to lay out the curriculum so that you can see, oh, I was adding this week, and I was multiplying this week, and I was dividing this week, and now I'm using powers or exponents this week, but similar activities, so that we're really becoming familiar with the curriculum by looking at each of these individual operations. So I just wanted to point that out to you because Lee really has worked very hard to include that mapping for those weeks. All right, so I'm going to pause and give you a minute to ask questions. I did add some more information here because I know this was a question last week about what is included in the digital versions of the curriculum and what's included in the print versions. And so let me pause for a moment and please ask any questions.
I'm curious if you have a targeted actual day release date for these things this spring that you're sharing.
Well, we don't mind sharing it. It's just saying, and then we fail.
Oh, no.
They've made it into the catalog. You've seen that if you got the new catalog. So somewhere between, say April at the latest, April, early May, they should be available. We're trying for sooner than that though.
Do you mean the curriculum itself available for sale?
Yes.
The complex.
The complex, yeah, we have a date for that. That is April 23rd.
There you go. Okay. It's a stick in the sand now.
At least it's not a Sharpie.
It
is a Sharpie, apparently. Thank you, Sherry, for sharing that.
I do want to clarify, because I spoke with some families yesterday, and I do want to clarify that when we talk about those digital versions of the curriculum being available in April, it will be for those who are enrolled and have paid to their tuition as needed for the 24-25 academic year. So, you know, the CC Connected year kind of goes along with when you're enrolled. And so it will be released for that 24-25 academic year. So if you don't want to wait until August to get into those materials, just make sure that you are enrolling in your community and getting your director to get you put into the system soon. And Melba, you have your question up. What would you like to ask or say?
So I want to add on a question to what you just said. That is that availability for those of us who do not have students in Challenge A coming up?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
So right now for everybody who's enrolled in the 23-24 year, you have access to all of the naturals materials. Beginning for those who are enrolled in the 24-25 academic year, they will have access to the digits, the naturals, and the fractions, as well as the companion. And then the following year, that'll build out until we have them all available in print.
Okay, so my original question was, is it recommended? This is what I'm thinking. I have a challenge A, challenge B, challenge 2, and a second tour essential student coming up. I'm graduating challenge 4 this year, and I thought it would be a good idea to tackle the math map with the 3 next year. Does that seem like a good idea?
It does. I would start your essential student with the fractions, and your older students maybe with the complex. I would not recommend going ahead. There's enough in the materials to not need to go ahead. Or even possibly, your older students, right, could start with fractions, and your youngest with the naturals. We recommend everybody go through the naturals first, however old they are. That's your best preparation for jumping into the complex level. But with your older students, if you wanted to use the complex with them, I would recommend either the naturals or the fractions for your essentials age student.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And Betty, you have your hand up.
Yes, that you answered part of my question with that one, so thank you for that. But so I am definitely recommending my Challenge A families to do naturals like over the summer, just to get acclimated to what it looks like, things like that. But they aren't going to have access. Am I correct in that none of these individuals that are doing the beta will have access to the charts? Or will they through the companion?
If they are enrolled in the 24-25 academic year, they would be able to see the charts digitally through the companion.
Okay.
They will not be able to download those and print them out.
But the charts that if they have a Challenge A student, they'll actually have the chart in.
Yes.
So
if they have the printed materials, they will have a printed version of the charts. Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
You're welcome.
So I have a question about the companion for parents. Are the weekly videos are only accessible for the Challenge 8 directors and tutors and leaders, or those parents who would like more guidance other than the guide, and would they have access to the weekly videos too?
So there are some. So just to clarify, we have a few things that are available to everybody. This is not going to be a digital curriculum. It's not going to have digital instruction where you could sit your kid down and say, watch this video. We are going to have shorter videos that are specific to different topics. So for example, when you get to lesson 14 and you're looking at constructions, that's really hard to explain in words. It's a lot easier to explain with a short video clip. So there will be short video clips to explain certain things. So it would be a case of you saying, well, I want to go and look and find a video clip for this explanation. The tutors will have access to a video equipping that is just for them, and only tutors will be able to access that. And that will prepare them for the in-community portion of the day. So it is, that is the goal, that it will be, right, preparing them for that in-community portion. It's not a math tutorial, it's really preparing them for how to lead the math map in community. Tutors will have access to the math map team if they have some math questions. So if you as a parent said, I don't really understand this, and they said, I don't understand it, they're going to have access to us as a team to come and say, hey, I've got this math question, can you help me? And we will. And then they can come back and help you, right? So that'll be that. And as long as we have the book club going, right, we'll be here continuing with the book club where you could come and ask questions also. All right.
There's a few questions in the chat, Kirsty, that haven't been answered.
Okay.
One is, will people not in CC be able to purchase? And did we already answer that one? Will
We
they be
have
able
not. Yeah,
what?
so we are not restricting the purchase of the math map to just families in CC, but if you are not in CC, if you are not in a CC community, you will not have access to the companion or to any extended support.
Okay, great. And then the second question is, after we print a given level, will it still be available to CC connected users? So say in 2025, after it's printed, will parents still be able to access in CC connected?
No, once each domain has been printed, then the digital version will be removed. And so that will go away and it will just be available in print. We do have plans in place that if something happened and you lost a booklet or spilled coffee on a booklet, that you could get a digital replacement of just that piece of it. But we will not be continuing to offer all of those digital versions.
Remember something that's not on this slide that you say it all the time, Kirsty, but maybe we need to write it here, is that because you have the difference between digital and print, but that the flashcards are available to anybody also. And the flashcards matter as much as the curriculum. So it's a good place to start if you're unsure.
Great. Yes, and we have new flashcards coming out. We have flashcards for notation. We have flashcards for fractions, and we have other sets in development that will be coming out in the course of the next couple of years. So there's a lot more than just multiplication and addition that's going to be available for your families. Okay, let's go ahead and look at lesson 8. And I'm going to go ahead and we're going to skip familiar and unfamiliar for this page. And instead, I'm going to ask you to look at that box there where it says count forwards and count backwards. And what do you think it means to count?
Well, it begins with sequential ordering of concrete objects and the number of them. But that's a mouthful. What's that mean?
It's like just moving from one digit to the next.
I think of natural numbers. Sorry.
Yeah.
Something that never occurred to me till now when you asked the question, what does it mean to count, is that it means you have to look at each thing. Each thing matters in between, which then of course reminds me that if the hairs on your head are counted, God didn't overlook any of it.
It's great.
I think counting is giving name to an abstract thought. So if I'm counting the legs of a chair, 1, 2, 3, 4, I can see the legs of the chair. I have the abstract thought of 4, but then I'm putting those two together.
Right, so here's a word that we all use all the time, and look at the depth that we just came up with, right? And I love the fact that you guys are not just saying, hey, I'm going up by 1 each time, but you're saying I have to go object by object, right? And I have to make this one-to-one correspondence. And Jill, I love that you brought what God says about counting, right? That he's counted our hair, right? Like have you ever tried to count your hairs? Right. And so the fact that God, right, because when we think count, it's not just, oh, God knows how many hairs, right? But he counts, right? He's looked at each little thing. But then he says, you told Abraham, you can't count, right? You can't count the number of descendants that you have. Like, so what does that mean? Right. And so here's a great example of, and probably more for us as adults than for our children, but what we mean when we talk about seeing the unseen, right? And so there's the math, right? What do we mean when we say count? But then we take that and we say, well, how is this teaching me something about God? And so when we really think about what it means to count, right, how does that help us to appreciate who he is, that he can count things we can't, right? And that he cares enough to count and not
I heard
just
a
know.
couple of interesting examples this past week, and one I actually have brought up before from was from a sermon from Rabbi Zacharias, as he was asking, well, how much does one teardrop plus one teardrop equal? Because they combine and they're just another teardrop. And then Doug Wilson, I will listen to a podcast, and he said, so what exactly is the weight of a squared plus b squared equals c squared? That there's some things that science and materialism can't account for. And so just asking this count question kind of falls in that category to just talk about just words, because, you know, we're trying to raise wordsmiths too.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and look at page 2. And take a look at this page and tell me what's familiar and what's unfamiliar.
Showing the number lines is familiar.
Good.
Those brackets I can never draw are familiar. It's unfamiliar having the n plus 2 and 2n.
Okay.
And infinity is familiar.
So would somebody read the instructions for that second section? What are some of the words? What are the instructions tell us to do?
It
You
says
mean
measures for
roots?
finding.
Right, yeah, right below the well, go ahead and read the bar first. What does that say? That middle bar.
Methods for finding roots of quadratic polynomials. Ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0.
Okay, so that sounds really great for our 6-year-olds, doesn't it? Now, would somebody read, let's look at the activities. Somebody read the instructions.
Trace the roots, trace the solution, and complete the square.
Are those activities doable by a 6-year-old?
Yes.
Right, and so this is a great example of, there's a big idea on this page that's going to help us to see how these ideas build over time. But all we're asking for our youngest students to do here is to trace and then fill in the boxes, right? So now look underneath that, right, where it says roots, trinomial, and completed square. Does that help us see what skills we're building towards? Are the students doing anything with that?
No.
No. Reading it, maybe.
Right. Or maybe a parent might read it to them, right? So I really wanted to just emphasize how sometimes we're going to look at these pages and go, well, my kid can't do that. That's too hard. And that's where we really need to pause and read the instructions and look at what the activities are. And then as parents say, oh, that's what we're building towards, but we're not there yet. And that's okay.
So Kirsty, can I ask where it says read the words, is that referring like to roots, trinomials, completed square?
Yes.
Specifically those words? Okay.
And it could be any words, Carrie, right? I mean, you could, any of those words, hey, let's read these together. And reading it doesn't mean we necessarily have to understand it, right? You know, if you think about, right, we read a lot of things in Latin in challenge that we don't at first understand, right? Or we can read unfamiliar words, we maybe read them. I mean, that's one of the sad things about our society is the number of people who can read, but they're functionally illiterate because they don't know the meanings of the words. And so we want to start though with reading, right? What do these symbols mean? What do these words say? and then we're going to build meaning onto them. We're not going to leave them there. We're going to build meaning over time.
If you look at the top where, can I say, we look at the top where it says words, symbols, and images, that trinity is what's true of every single language on the face of the earth. That in my head, I might think of the number 3, and then I might write the symbol 3, but it attaches to the idea of 3 things. And that's true for the word blue, or for anything else that you can come up with. And so we're trying to remind people that it's, you know, you can't read this page and know this, but if you read through the whole companion and get through all the curriculum many, many years, you'll start to see all these trinities coming up, besides the ones, you know, in logarithms, powers, and roots, like Kirsty just said. So there's hints, but we don't give you the whole story at once because nobody's ready for it.
That was what I was going to tack on, is that yesterday in challenge 4, one of my students was frustrated because he was trying to understand too many things at once about derivatives. And I said, okay, all I want you to do right now is understand what the notation means and nothing else. I don't want to talk to you about any other layer until you've mastered that. And he got very, very frustrated. And I said to him, okay, last year when you were in Shakespeare and you were reading the plays, did you understand every word every single day? No. And why did you all tell me that the 5th play was your favorite one? Not because it was the best play of the year, but because you had gotten enough practice in Shakespeare to fill in all those gaps, because you had all that context and all that practice reading. So now I need you to trust me and be patient in math also, that you need to build the language and you need time.
Excellent. Great example.
All right, let's look at page 3 and talk about familiar and unfamiliar, and specifically look at the operations on this page. Donna, it is hard to live in the grammar, but we need to. Don't we? I think we sometimes need to rest in the grammar, and then the dialectic comes.
I love to live in the dialectic, but it's hard to go back to that grammar. It's like we want to push it to the dialectic even before we've learned the grammar.
So I have a grammatical question, Kirsty. In the math map, symbols like greater than, less than, equal, are they considered operations like plus, minus, divide, or do they have a different category?
Well, so when I liken, and I know I said these were, I used our operations a minute ago and said they were like verbs, because they were the doing, the thing that we were going to do. But if I was to write out a math sentence, the greater than, equals, less than symbols are really my verb, and my operations are more like prepositions. So I say 2 plus 3 equals 6. Equals is my verb. If I was to be diagramming this, that would be my verb, and I would say 2, and then I'm relating 2 and 3, right? So I'm going to say plus 3. Like instead of saying the cat on the table, I'm saying 2 plus 3, and then again equals 6, right? So now I have my kind of my predicate nominative there. So I would say that your comparison symbols are like your verbs, and they are different to your operations.
And I would say your symbols are more like conjunctions instead of prepositions. But
okay.
Yeah, that's how I think about it too, Jana.
I think I would say that the equals is, that's so interesting. I would say the operations are the verbs, and I would say the equals would be like I'm losing the word right now, the predicate adjective. Because it like describes, it finishes the thought, right? Like this is what you did to this. So you took 2 and you added it to 3, and then you ended up, so it could even be a predicate noun, but like, I love the idea that this can go from a math conversation to an English conversation to help everybody every right, left brain person kind of be involved in that way.
Yeah, and if Kirsty's right or Nicole's right isn't really the issue in classical conversation seminars. It's, oh, great, what another conversation we can have. Now let's go research when we get home and see if over a year or two we have a different answer, right? To be patient with the questions too. And then guess what? I'm pretty sure Dr. Gilpin's right, but she's willing to be challenged. She likes it.
I am
That's
always
exactly
happy
what
to
my next
discuss.
stop. Well, that was exactly my next stop, but I'm sure I'm right.
But we can, it's the conversation, right? That's where the learning happens. And because if I explain something to you and I just give that to you, it's just grammar, right? That's the problem with our contemporary math education that's out there, is that when it's didactic, when there's a teacher standing and saying, I'm going to teach you this, they are just transmitting grammar. Now, it's not until that light bulb goes off that we have reached understanding. So I could sit here and say to you, this is what I think, and this is how I interpret it. And you might all go, okay. But in the wrestling with that idea back and forth, going, well, what about this? When you go, oh, I see it now. I see why you said that's the linking verb. That's the dialectic. And that comes through that conversation and that wrestling with the idea. Until you've wrestled with it, it's just grammar, right? And so there's nothing wrong with it being just grammar, because it's that accumulation of grammar that leads us to those light bulb moments. But I just want to encourage you all that it's not about being right or wrong. It's about asking those questions that are going to get you to that moment. So yes, there are some errors on this page that we've already identified. And
no, actually, that's the error. Read the instructions.
Oh, that is the error. Yes.
No,
You're
I
supposed
got
to
it.
find
You're supposed
that.
to cross it out.
Yes.
Gotcha. I did not read the instructions. My bad.
That's okay, Gary. Every single one of our designers has corrected that page for me. And I keep telling them, read the instructions.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and flip through to page 4. I'm going to let you guys talk about this. I just need to take this. I'm going to wait to take it. I think it's okay. But anyway, so go ahead. What do you see on this page that's familiar and unfamiliar? And then notice at the bottom, it says to discuss the images. So I want you to, as you're looking for familiar and unfamiliar, I want you to think about how you could discuss those images that you're tracing. Right? So the line, segment, and ray, and then the vector. How could you discuss those?
In the very bottom part, I think I would also talk about the games, right? Dominoes. This reminds me of a Trivial Pursuit board.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a question that the second section, the instructions say trace and simplify. Well, I think at least my first grader or kindergarten would not know the meaning of simplify. So as a parent, I say, hey, trace and simplify. Mommy, what is simplify? What should I say? What would be a good answer?
Yeah, so simplify is one of our instructional words that's used right from the very from week 2. And so it's one of those keywords like trace, simplify, copy, color, complete. There's about a dozen words that are used in the instructions for the little guys, and that's it. So that hopefully they can become familiar with that couple of handfuls of words and not have to ask you all the time. But until they get those visual clues, then you're going to have to show them a few times how to do the problems.
Okay.
And I think having the blank there kind of gives them the clue that, oh, I need to put a number here.
Yeah.
So to answer, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, looking at that example row too, right? That's one of the things we really want to encourage you to do is look at that example row and say, what did they do here? Oh, they did the subtraction. So I guess I'm going to do the addition, right? So even if I don't know what simplify is, I want to look at how the example was done and use that to figure out the next one. Nicole, what were you going to share? I'm sorry, I jumped on you.
Nope, not at all. I was gonna say, to answer the question about how we could discuss that first section, I think my first response would be to talk about the different shapes that are at the ends of each of those lines and just ask, you know, what, you know, it looks like each of these is a line, but there's something, so I would compare. I might start by comparing what's the difference between the line and the segment and the ray and the vector and what the shapes that are on either end of each line.
That's perfect, right? Because all of our kids, that's accessible to all of our kids. And so that's just perfect. I love that.
I think that when we see this grammar and we have these conversations, just like the essentials grammar or anything else starts to come into math, that our math grammar starts to go into other areas. So we might find ourselves even using the word simplify when we're talking about packing for a vacation or doing other things. Our kids might possibly, from our exposure to hearing words used this way and seeing words, we might start to use them in new places, which actually give them greater context and help them to understand what we're asking them to do when we say it.
Yeah, and just on those images at the top left, the line, the segment, the ray, and the vector, all you did, I think it was Nicole, but all you did was use the common topic of comparison. What's the same in all these and what is different? And so that's a great time for you to pull out your tools that are on that one page of the catalog and just know that you can have a really good discussion just using that simple question. What's the same and what's different?
That's what I was thinking, but maybe even going back further and asking them to express it or tell a very, very short story. Like once two friends got in a fight and they never became friends again, or something like that. So see if we could very quickly express this either visually, they could like act it out, or tell a very short story.
I like that.
That's good.
I was just going to add to sometimes just saying, what do you see? Because that can give you so much insight, because some of them are going to see the dots and some are going to see the arrows and some are going to see the lines. And that gives you insight into where they are. And they're like, why is this one on the end like half an arrow? I mean, it's like, it just leads to so much discovery. Just that one question.
You see how doing
like,
math,
you just never know. Yeah.
so you see how doing that, people who've always loved math, it trains them to see what's in front of them, because the symbols are so dense and so varied, but so precise. And that's what, so, we're not really teaching math, and that we're teaching how to see the unseen. This, the things that are situational awareness is just plummeting in our culture because everyone looks at these little tiny screens instead of out. And yet here's an opportunity to look at a very small thing, a math page, and take that and use it in such a way that you do get to look out. But they're children, they're immature, so you have to tell them. They won't be analogous. They won't get that what's on this page is helping them see other things unless you also are modeling that and thinking about it and helping them. And then once they're older, of course, they'll start.
Lee, I love what you just said. It reminded me of an experience I had possibly back in elementary school. I don't really remember. I remember being in a school setting and we had somebody come in and do a presentation about speed reading. And they talked about how if you're a speed reader, people who have trained themselves to be speed readers, they literally just go down the middle of the page. They don't look at the edges of the page. They go down the middle of the page and they let their brain fill in the gaps. Just like all of those things we see on social media where there's words missing or letters missing and our brain fills in the gaps. With words that are so familiar to us, we fill in the gaps really easily. With math and that density of symbols, we don't fill in the gaps as easily. So we have to slow down. So we've gotten lazy with our reading, is that we don't always read word for word, right? We read in chunks. But with math, we really need to slow down and be very attentive. All right.
Good. I like that. And I like how it'll help us be better Bible readers.
Yes. All right. Well, we are at 2 o'clock. So are there any final questions before we jump off?
I do have one question. The way that you guys are managing this book club, is that how seminar will look for Challenge A directors? Is that similar to what will be happening in the seminar?
Not really, because in seminar, there are going to be more pieces. So in seminar, they're going to start off by looking at the math map, which we did, and then looking at the cover. And there's going to be a time of exordium using the cover art, quotation, and reflection to have that conversation. And so we eliminated that from this version of the book club just because of time constraints. They will then use the frames that are in the booklet, which are 2 pages or 2 of the frames that are at the front of the booklet that help to organize the information in different ways. And so tutors are going to be equipped to ask 5 common topic questions about the material, and then also to look at memoria and arrangement of the material before they then are going to have time to ask questions from the previous week, a time to just look at the charts quickly and reinforce that idea of familiar and unfamiliar, and then wrapping up the class with looking ahead and looking at those page tops from each page. So a portion of the class may look a little bit like what we're talking about, where we look at the pages, but they're going to do sort of more each week in seminar and really invite those students into the conversation in multiple ways.
I do think what Kirsty's been doing, though, is a really good example of family table time doing math that you launched on the first few pages with everybody, and then little kids maybe taper off and older kids get deeper and do more. And how she's been just looking at, the thing of it is, the parent, if you help your child do the first 4 pages, the other 4 repeat. And so it should make your time at the table more efficient with them also. And that's why on some days we say discuss the images, and other days read the words, and other days, look at the symbols, to help the parent notice that I can do different things on different days and continue the conversation with them. So I think everything Kirsty's doing in bits should fit for everybody somewhere.
So just a couple of questions about the companion.
I love that. Thank you.
The companion will be digital because there's just, unless you want, a book that's like this thick or, takes up as much bookshelf space as is behind us, it's going to be digital. There will be at some point a printed resource, but that's not available yet. The digital companion is planned to be available in April. Just like the digital lessons, that will be for those families who are enrolled in the 24-25 academic year. So you will have access to the companion and those digital lessons as soon as you are fully enrolled for next year.
And that companion will have the questions that we ask in class. You talked about, okay.
Yes, that will be where your tutor equipping will be. So those tutors can get all of that equipping prior to and yes, digits and fractions in April, again, for those enrolled in the 24-25 academic year. All right, well, if you have more questions, write them down and bring them back next week. Next week will be exciting because we're going to be in the 2nd dimension. So we have just wrapped up our 1st dimension. And so all kinds of new things moving ahead. So I look forward to discussing that with you.
Hi, thank you, Kirsty.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.